Alright, so my name's Kyle Davis, and this video I just wanted to educate some people about how Far Cry 5 Editor works. For some of the more advanced concepts that go into different types of lighting volumes and different types of set design elements that you don't really see most people use, but it really sells the effects once you actually get into the engine. So first thing I wanted to talk about over here is your environment. And this is pretty simple. It goes down the line through all of your basic things that you can end up doing to make your environment better. You can change the time of day to make it brighter or darker depending on what it is. Well, we'll leave it there for right now just to talk about this. And then you can even change the latitude of where things are to help adjust slightly more based off what you want. So we're going to start and try to make a nice little sunset here that comes from the north. There we are. And as we notice, that starts adding a lot more atmosphere into our basic level already to begin with. We got these nice shadows dragging along. But we also get into some of the other things, such as like moon phase and stuff like that, if you want to really sell a certain concept at night. Right now we're set as exterior, so this is our main dominant lighting that'll persist over the entire area before we start getting into volumes. Volumes add in a lot of stuff, and that's what we're going to start getting into, but I want to go through the rest of the options first, just so we have a better grasp of what we can do with our basic environment, and then how we augment that with the volumes. So, can set like different ambient colors. If we want this to be more of a red sunset, we'd hike up some more of the red, but we don't want it to just like saturate everything. So we're gonna go and we're gonna add in a little bit more color in the green and give it a little bit of a warmer color. Now, another part of this that I see not a lot of people use is your sky all collision. So if you start playing with it and you see, the more on collision we get rid of, the darker it ends up getting. And this has to do with it not diffusing our ambient bounce very much. So once we get rid of this completely, you're going to see our ambient comes in a lot more. And depending on what we want, we're going to work with this a little bit more. But my general sense of the term is to keep this higher, anywhere from about half to up to 1 for this number, just because of the fact that we're going to be using this color scheme here from ambient and sky all collision for once we start getting into volumes, because these are some of the settings that we actually change. So let's leave that all the way up for right now. So once we go inside our little hut of blocks here, you see a visible change going on. Because if we don't, it's going to get a little hard to tell. Now, in this, we actually get to sell a lot of different weather effects that people don't really think about. So, we have different types of skies we can end up doing, and each one of them goes through different sets based off what game mode, based off the game that we're putting in question here, and then just how you want to sell it. So, when you look through these, make sure you experiment and make sure that you find something that works for the level that you want to do, because that really helps sell what we're trying to do here. So what I'd like to see is find something that works with our sunset a little bit, like this here. This one kind of has this nice gradation off, but I think we could do a little bit better. Let's see what we got. Let's go with Horizon 2 and see what we get there. Alright. This adds quite a dark sunset into our scene. Going to try... Ah, there we go. That's a nice warm one for us. So we'll use this for our sunset as of right now. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do with this. And if we want some clouds, we could add in some, and that adds in a lot more effect into our level. It helps sell what we're trying to do. So most people end up just not using this at all. And just looking at that, it looks okay. It looks pretty overcast. But if we use one of these, like if we use the Milky Way here, that would be a nice night scene. We have some interesting ones for if we're in certain environments. I'm gonna go with Sky 4. This was a really nice one that I liked. It has a lot of different types of clouds that we can see, and it persists pretty well with our sun in the background there. Now the other thing about this is we get to even sell the cloud height. We set it at 0 at the beginning, but we can drag that in to bring everything down lower, which I think we're going to do just to sell that lazy afternoon sky. And then the shadows, you can set different types of lighting for this, and this actually gradates out what we're using, and will actually add in some environmental shift, because depending on how you put the wind force and what setting you put the clouds on, it will actually change a lot more. Overcast generally keeps it set so that everything is very dark and it doesn't really break up very easily. The one I like to use a lot is either few clouds or mostly cloudy, but the only time I use mostly cloudy is when I really want to sell a dark scene, and even then, I like to up the wind force so we get a little bit more fluctuation going on. Because this will end up fluctuating it so that when we look on the ground, we'll end up seeing some fluctuation as we occur through the level. We won't see much of it now because we don't really have much in our scene to show, but keep this in mind once you start making bigger levels. These are some of the more important settings to help sell that dynamicness of your level. Another thing we can end up doing here that we're not going to keep on long, but just to show that it works, we have a storm that we can end up doing. This ends up adding in some effects for rain sounds and also some lightning effects. We're not really going to keep this on because it doesn't fit with what we're doing, so we'll just leave that off. But what I'd like to do, since we have this really nice bright sun for a sunset, what do you think when you think of a sunset like that? You think that it's going to be in your eyes, right? Well, let's sell that so it doesn't look like it's off of a camera, because that doesn't really look very realistic. Let's do sun low. Now, as you can see, just by adding that, we get this little corona effect down on the bottom, and that persists along the rest of it. Now, depending on how bright we want to make the sun, we can actually end up making this corona a lot bigger. There we go. Nice sunset. This ends up augmenting whatever we have around here. So, if we look at our blocks, we'll notice that the back is relatively dark. The sides don't really have much, but once we get to the front, we get this nice transitionary color. And if I pull in an asset so that we can just see what that looks like, we'll see that it actually makes things pop a lot more than normal. So if we go into agricultural and you know what, get just a nice large building. Pop that in. Alright. I'm going to use this for our building. Now, as you can see, it doesn't look like much right now, but even the effect of having this pop through, so as if we walk around in this building, and we have this nice corona effect around the area, it looks a lot more striking when you come to one of the windows. Now, the next part of this, we go over to our environment, is going to be some of our moon flare. We don't have a moon scene that we're really working with, but it essentially does the same thing that this corona does for the sun flare, but on a lower scale. Now, the next thing we can even add in is some fog. Now, it looks pretty daunting because there's quite a bit, but we're going to go through it slowly and show you exactly what everything is. First of all, we have our density. Now, just hiking this up to like a base of 1, we have that at 0.01. You see that dramatically starts adding some more into the scene, even if it's not by much. It's good to have at least a little bit, just because that ends up breaking up some of your farther off objects, that they start looking hazier in the distance, and it also helps cover up some of those bad load areas once we get farther in, because when we have a lot of things on the map and it's a large map, it ends up going through a lot of different things that might not exactly work correctly. So it might despawn something before you want it to, and the fog just helps hide that a little bit. We can make this really foggy to the point where it's just soup that you could barely see through. This, depending on if this is the level you're going for, I wouldn't recommend it because it persists through any building you have, and this engine doesn't really have a way to get rid of that. So if you're going to do fog, I recommend keeping it fairly low, even here, even at like 65 or 52 at we're at right now. This is very, very foggy, and it work for what we want. So we're just going to keep that little bit low end, just a little bit of that pop, and it helps our Corona, because this is where we're at right now. Now watch with it off. Take that off, just takes all of the life out of the scene. Adds a little bit in there. It gives it this nice, hazy atmosphere. And actually, I think we're going to put this at 101, just so we have that little bit on the horizon there. That just helps. Now, the other nice thing is, we can adjust its height. We can say, hey, I want it to be really light fog, but I want it to go up really high. It's set all these parameters, so you can have this as, if this is an area where we set really far into the ground, we can set this low, so that when we go under the base level of the map, it sinks into those little areas where you want it to. We're just going to leave that at the neutral for now. Now we also have scattering. This is another really important one, because the more or less you do of this, the more it really sells the effect. It basically diffuses it slightly more. So it's an in-between between upping to the next density and just getting rid of it completely. Now the next thing we have is our extinction, and this is basically, when you look at clouds and fog, it kind of evaporates over time. So the more we up or push down the extinction, you see it gets more solid to a certain extent. So this is just what is our base density going to be, or what our area looks like. Now along with that, we have our phase forward. This ends up saying, hey, how much light do we want to diffuse through? And as you can see, it shifts around quite a lot. It's a little subtlety, but it's just one of those things where you might want to keep this in mind if you're really trying to go for very subtle changes through different areas, depending on what you're actually trying to do. This next one just ends up giving it just a little bit more of a smattering in certain areas. You end up getting something where it's, how should I say? When you're going through, you'll get more pockets of it. That's about it. And then the rest is just what hues do you want it to be. And then we're talking about our base density. This is a really hard one to keep in check, because this is basically saying, hey, I want my sky on the top of the fog to be really blocked out and cloudy. This is better for if you're doing like sandstorms, but even then, it's a really hard one to use. Then you have the top, minimum, and maximum, so you could gradate your fog a little bit more. In the background here, you see that it kind of shifts up and down. Not by much, but it just gives it that little extra. And then also our max height, so we can diffuse it slightly more. Now the next couple things we have are a few more things to also help cellular level. This is something a lot of people actually do, but I notice they don't go through with everything they need to. And I just want to give a little bit of a tip for some of this. So if we do mountains as our background here, and you see, yeah, that looks pretty good. This is us looking at it from up top. Make sure you get into the game and look around. And no matter where you are, if you have an elevated area, check what you're doing. Because if you see right there, we are actually seeing the edge of where this cuts off. That's a problem. A lot of people I see when they make these maps, they end up not adjusting their backdrop height or the drop angle. And when you make certain areas, this has a huge effect on selling your scene. Because if this is off angle and we put this really far down, this makes it look like it's a plateau, but it's really, really flat and consistent, so it doesn't really look quite right. And then if we put this really high, you're just underneath it, which isn't a good look either, unless you make sure that all of your walls from this with your terrain bump up against this or higher than it, and the player can't see past that. One of those things that you really got to keep in mind. Along with this drop angle, you can move this around to get a better sense of where things are. So if we want our sun to be there and we want it to look like this, instead of how it was originally where it just blocks it out, just rotate it slightly till you get what you want. That little bit of a peak of the sun out of it. But this is in that really odd orientation, so we're going to bring this back down. And that's a little bit too much, so we're going to push it over a little bit more until we get to a point where it's just slowly peeking out. As you see, as we're rotating it, we're going to have to crank it down slightly. These are the things you got to keep in mind with some of this, or else stuff that you make is just not going to have that higher level of authenticity. Now, with our post-processing, this is another important thing that we got to keep. So if we look at our building here, and let me flip through the floor so you don't see the floor, and we can focus just on this. If we just have the default here. Now, if we go to post-apocalyptic, see how it changes the whole scene? Now if we go to black and white, or any of these other things, we want to accentuate stuff. Gotta find the right filters that we want, really sell. This one, if you look at this to the default, look at how much different that is. Just adds this little extra bit that makes it pop. Now this works while we're inside too. For right now. So, if we go around and look, you see that changes everything. Now, this is going to be your base color you use. This is something that you really need to keep in mind. That seems like a nice one. Now, this one seems like it doesn't do a lot. Let's just see. See that how much more vibrant color that is? It doesn't desaturate anything at all. It actually really helps sell the scene, gives us this nice sunset, and we keep our warm colors without impacting the rest of the environment of what we want to do with our house. That's something you need to keep in mind. And then also, we can also fade this in and out depending on how much of that we want. So see, this looks really dreary and dismal for what we have. But if we just up that, now this looks a lot nicer and gives it a lot nicer of a feel. A lot warmer and inviting instead of being really dark and scary. And this really helps sell what your maps are. It's something that your scenes really need to keep in mind. Also, we have some effects here. These I don't really recommend because these are really hard to work with. I'm using this in another project at the moment, and I actually keep it about here. And this is a lot at some points. This is if you want to sell certain effects that you're doing. So, if we want to have certain effects with the character, you can end up using these. I don't really think it's necessary in most of the maps people are going to make that you even use these. It's something to sell a little bit extra, but you have to make sure you're in the right theme and genre in it, and critically think, does this make sense for my level? Along with that, we have our effect, obviously, and the exposure of what those effects are. That's not really something we have to worry about here. but they help manage what those are. Now, when we're going into our ambient sounds, this is another thing that you should really keep in mind. But don't overuse it or use things that are completely inappropriate. Once you pick one of these, sit there and listen for about 5 to 10 minutes and really take it in. Because some things have certain effects that you can't take out that kind of ruin what your level would be. If we go exterior fields here, you'll get these nice crickets in the background. You get this nice wind rolling. Nice birds chirping, see? This helps add more to a scene than you would think. And then if we end up wanting to use this, and we're just going to say yes for now, make sure keep that at whatever it is, and keep Silent Occlusion on. Along with that, there's different music you can actually end up doing. A lot of these I don't actually recommend because they are far too loud, and also most of them need trigger boxes to really be used effectively, and that's not really what it's about. We're talking more about the scene effects and sound effects and stuff like that for basic stuff. Alright, so now that we've got the basics of what the environment tool does and all of the stuff in it, let's start getting into what volumes we have and what they can do. So, first I'm going to take my most basic volume I have here, and that's going to be my lighting management volume. We're going to drag this to our house, and we're going to scale this up. Just in your preferences of the object preference here, we're just going to scale these so that we get a dramatic difference. It doesn't have to be perfect for a demonstration, just to show that it works. Alright. Now, we're going to put this to our house here like this. That when we walk into it, when we walk through this, we're going to get the same effect that we do here. So, first things first is we need to set a few things. Now, notice, once we walk in here, this completely deadens all of our sound effects. Now, we're going to get into that a little bit more, but right now, once we get into this volume, it's basically saying, hey, I have no idea what's going on with that, and since I'm in a new volume that has different parameters, I'm not going to use any of the previous parameters, even if they're on the same priority. Don't worry, we'll get into that and what priority actually means. But first, let's have this, and we're going to take our preset from the object itself of this lighting management volume. We're going to set this to interior 1. Now, anything that's on interior 1 is going to use the interior 1 preset off of our environment, from our environment tab here. Now, with that, we're going to click on interior 1, and if we notice a few things changed, our sky occlusion and our ambient bounce for our different colors changed. Nothing else did. This is something you got to keep in mind, because there's very few things you can change here, but what you do with them dramatically affects what's going to happen in our scene. So, since we have this set at interior 1, and this is already set up to use this, all we have to do is change these sliders. So we're going to say I'm going to want the inside to be really dark, and since this is still inside of the building, I want it to be red, but I just want it to be a little bit more of all of them in general. We're just going to say this. Now, I'm going to go into the game here, and we're going to see what this does.
Assault!
Alright. So, I'm outside. You see how red it is? As soon as we get into this building, you're going to see it starts fading darker. Now, if I go back outside, I'm going to fade slightly lighter. Very subtle, but you see that will change? Brighter, darker. This is kind of stuff that really helps sell whatever your level is, because just this little transition gives the player a bigger sense of what's going on, of, hey, I'm going into a building, it's not going to be the same lighting, so just keep that in mind. And since we're outside of our volume, keep this in mind too. Your volume has to fit the whole inside of the space that you want it to be, because whatever the bounding box of the volume is going to be what it actually changes. So, as you saw, once we walked upstairs, we were outside of our volume, or where our head is, because our head just slightly sticks out over this volume itself. And if we were to walk behind the building over to here, you see that transition? So it's really bright red, and now it's getting dark. Really bright, darker. This is the kind of thing that really helps sell your level. So this is something you should definitely keep in mind. Alright. Now, along with this, there's a few other things that we're going to talk about that go in conjunction with it. Our first one, and I have a few things here just to show this off, is we have our object preferences for reflection management volume. Now, all of these can be found within your objects folder. And you're going to be looking down by audio and visuals. And when you click on the correct one, in this case we're in visuals right now, and you look to volumes, that's what these two are. Click it and drag it in the scene, brings a new one in, no problem. Alright. Now with this is going to work almost exactly the same. We just drag it over whatever we're doing. So in this case we're going to drag it over our thing. And we're going to just set this up to be the size that we need. And with this is going to set up a different set of parameters for us. So right now I'm just going to go over to the Arcade Editor settings, and we're going to turn off our lighting management volume so we can see inside of here a little bit better. Okay, this can always be returned on, but you can't really manipulate the object and know where your bounding is going to be unless you have this on, so keep that in mind if you can't find your object. So, what we're in right now is our reflective module, which is right here. This object is set up to Alpine Forest right now for whatever its reflective properties are. Now, with this, it'd be really hard to see the change, but I'm going to set this up to Rustic Bar. See how it changed all that to purple there? And it really darkened our wood? This just takes whatever our lighting is and it helps spread it more evenly across. Now you see that we have some faded areas within our actual building that pop out a lot more than they did before. They don't get blown out as much. Just one of those things where these, when you go through a few of these, see this makes some of the tints lighter. We have house interior for actual interiors, so we get that darker sense, and there isn't as much shine through certain areas. Go through another one that helps increase some tint around the windows. It's hard to see what these do. These can really help sell your level and make certain effects seem more prevalent to the player. I have some other levels that I'm going to show off with this in a little bit here that'll really accentuate this point of these bounding boxes. But for right now, that's going to be our second one. Now for our third one, this is an interesting one. Because these, if you notice, when we walk into our lighting and other volumes, we lose our sound every time we go into them. So, go in one more time to demonstrate that.
Assault.
Alright. We walk into our one. This one stays. And as soon as we walk into our lighting volume, it cuts out all the sound. This is something that it's basically taking one of the volumes and saying, hey, I need more information, so I'm just not going to display any of that. So for this, we need something that's called an audio management volume. There's quite a lot of these. These are all located within your, down at the bottom in audio. You go to volumes, there's 8 different ones. Each one of these works slightly differently. Certain ones add audio effects depending on what's going on, and certain ones just take the persistent stuff that we've already have and change it slightly. So in this case, we're going to take this basic warehouse one, and we're going to set it so that we get 70% of our sound occlusion present. This is going to say whatever our base priority is of whatever is in our environment, we're going to take that and put it at 70%. Now the thing with this is, we need to set a priority on this, because this is fighting with priority over the background audio. So to be able to get this, just take the slider and we up that. Whatever is the highest number in this is the highest priority. So we have quite a few different slider options, and then you can set that whatever your preference is of anywhere between 0 and 1. So there's quite a lot of variation, but we're just going to have that there. Now, when we go and walk into this, we're going to hear a slight difference in our sound.
Assault.
So as we walked into this, do you hear that the wind is now a lot quieter? And as soon as we walk out, it gets a lot louder. This is the basic premise of what these boxes do, and they allow us a lot of affordances when it comes to this. Now, I'm just going to set up some boxes in here quick so we know marker points to stand by for each of these. Basic box. Throw it by each of these. And I'm going to show you just some of the differences with each of them, because they all have slight differences. So the first one we were by just help muffles the area. You don't really hear much more of the wind. This one deadens it almost completely, as you can tell. We come over here, we get a more drafty wind that also superimposes itself into the scene. And as we can see, it's not really dampening anything because we haven't set that yet. But this is one of our, I believe, warehouse volumes, and this one does something completely different. And then we have a few others that do the same thing. This one super dampens, and this is all experimentation, finding the right ones to use in your scene as you go. And then our last one here, which does hardly anything because this one's based off of a small house, so you're going to hear a lot of the same stuff over and over and over. That's the basics of volumes. Now I'm going to show you what, when you combined a lot of these things together, what you can actually end up creating. So, in this, I was going for a really stormy, wind-ravaged sandstorm happening in this Mars area. As you can tell right off the bat, there's a lot going on here, but let me just disable a lot of the stuff, and let's just walk into the game that I can show you what's going on. And this, I used everything that I showed you. There was nothing I left out. This was all the stuff that I learned through trial and testing. I'm just trying to help speed up your process by helping make some of these things a little bit easier to understand. Because when I went through with what was happening in the environment tab, I did not know anything about the presets or anything about what was actually changed by the presets. So I would end up tweaking things for about 3 hours and then find out nothing worked right because I didn't set up a preset, or I was changing settings that don't actually change between the different presets. They're just static through everything, and it's based off the exterior. So it's just one of those things that's kind of concerning. But with this, it should go a lot faster and help sell your levels a little bit more.
Team deathmatch.
Okay, so in this I do have some particle effects, but you notice I have a little bit of fog in the background there. That just helps sell this effect more, so all that haziness, that's from the fog, so you can't really see any of the loading render going from low poly to high poly. So it's just something that helps out a little bit. I use the same thing where once you walk into an area, it darkens it so then you're actually inside of a thing. And then as you go back outside, it gets brighter again. A lot of these areas have a slight wind sound to them. And once you go into different areas, that will actually either increase or decrease depending on which building, such as these ones. This one was supposed to be about the same, but I have a few buildings over here. These go really far back, so I wanted it to really muffle the sounds. Along with that, I used my this little HUD aspect of the little dots to make it seem like you have a space helmet on. I had the same thing with the sun coming through, but I used a lot more less saturated colors to help give it this bleak sense of the environment going on. Along with that, you can still see a lot of the texture out in the background along with the environment, along with that stuff. And I kept in mind, since I have a really high platform there, that this keeps it in line. And then we have our shadows that come through, and I have the same occlusion over everything for my reflective volumes. So this is all just a standard to get this gamma effect, and then have the certain light shadows reflect off and give me the effects that it does on these objects, and gives it the shine that you see. It streaks across the ground. That's all portions of that as well. Now, if we get out and look at some of the stuff here that really changed this around, I'm gonna have to undo some stuff here quick, make sure I can show you. Alright, here's my occlusions. This was my base occlusion and reflective manager. Now, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on here. Let me turn off a bunch of bounding boxes and stuff so that you can actually see what's going on. Alright, so now that we just have the level, we're looking at it from here. I go over to my preferences and we go to this, and I go to, let's say we go to rustic bar, like we were looking at our other level. Notice how that really darkens a lot of these areas that we were just looking at. If I put this on Alpine Force, this really brightens everything up. It's just one of those things, certain ones of these do what you want, certain ones do what you don't want. It's just finding that happy medium of what reflections you want and what you don't want. Because some will darken these areas that are sheltered, some will highlight the edges more, sometimes they'll have some of the light bleed through to the other side of the object, so it's not completely dark. Even just this is a huge difference between these two options. You notice there's quite a lot changing over here on this side of the screen from these top portions of these buildings. There's just something to keep an eye out and watch. Now, if we look, here's what I was talking about with making sure that everything sets right. That all helps make your level more believable and makes it seem like you have everything going. This goes out quite far, and I've raised these up. I haven't put textures on them because they're so far away, it'll never render. But this lump is just here to block your view from seeing that edge. That's all this does. It just helps block out the edges that you can't see them. But we're still trying to sell this effect, and that's what all this really does. That's about everything. We went over the basics of what the environment does. Make sure when you're making your presets, these are the only 4 things you can change: your ambient balance for color red, green, and blue, and sky occlusion. These things are very important. Make sure you leave some sky occlusion. or when you go into buildings so that it can get darker. If you don't, you're just going to have a bad time later on because your insides are going to be brighter than your outsides, and that's before you even put your lights in. So that's something that you really want to keep in mind just to make sure that it seems more realistic. It gets darker when you go into a building, not brighter. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day.